Today, we'll talk about Grave of the Fireflies. It was released in 1988 on April 16th. That means tomorrow will mark the 31st anniversary of this film. So we're revisiting this film 31 years after its release. It was broadcast on TV just the day before yesterday. I always think, why is this film so sad? It's hard to watch. It's painful to watch. People find it really unnerving. It is a one and only anime, and I'd like to look into the secret behind it. The theme of the first half, it's divided into two parts, is 10 times scarier than it actually looks. I won't talk about the story behind it like I used to, or how other people usually do, but rather talk about the 10 times scarier version of the story. Then, the second half will be 100 times scarier version than the first half. No, really, after seeing this lecture, it'll be impossible for you to see the film the way you used to. You might no longer be able to cry through this film like everybody else does. So I'm telling you, beware. I myself was worried all afternoon thinking, won't it be too heavy for the audience? Anyway, I'll do my best. So I'd like to offer you a questionnaire. I'm interested in whether everyone has actually seen the film or not. Yes, this questionnaire. Please go ahead. Oh, it's not ready yet? Okay, I understand. Sorry, the questionnaire isn't ready yet. So I've seen the reactions from the viewers after it was broadcast on TV the other day. And they can be divided into 5 different groups. The first group hates the aunt. They hate the aunt who takes care of Seita. They blame the aunt for not feeding the two enough, and they think she's too hostile. Another group blames Seita. They blame Seita for not working, he doesn't wash the dishes after meals, and lets his aunt do all the jobs, so they think he deserves his punishment. The other group blames the war. They say that the war is the reason for everything. The aunt is on the edge because she's under great pressure in the midst of war. Seita is the son of a Navy officer and was pretty well off. If the war didn't break out, everything would have been okay for him. The fourth group says, come over to my house. All these people desperately tweeting, I'll let you eat as much as you want if you come to our house. I guess many people were really heartbroken. And the fifth group says, it was too hard to watch, so these people changed their channel to the variety show London Hearts. So more and more people switch to London Hearts during commercials. The questionnaire is ready. So there are 4 options. How many people have actually seen this film? Number 1, never seen it and never will. Number 2, never seen it but hope to see it. Number 3, seen it and will never see it again. Number 4, seen it and will see it again. I'm not forcing you to see it again. I simply want to know whether you have seen it or not. Are we ready? Okay, let me see it. Now we wait. Oh, that was fast. 50% says seen it and will never see it again. About 10% have never seen it. 6% says haven't seen it but hope to. Wow, some of you will see it more than twice. So about 80% have seen it. Impressive. If it's going to be torture, I won't see it. I see. I think this lecture is going to make you feel scared. That's all. Okay, shall we start? So, let us look at Isao Takahata's photo while we talk. Let me introduce the letters first. Hi, I am still in a state of shock after hearing about the passing of Mr. Takahata. While the producer Toshio Suzuki suggested a huge farewell party, Hayao Miyazaki was reluctant to even issue a comment. This reminded me of the dialogue between Degwen and Giren over Garma State funeral. My deep condolences. So yes, very neatly put. I heard the shocking news from my friend this morning and learned that Mr. Takahata had passed away. It might be a natural thing concerning the fact that he was over 80, but to me, both Takahata and Miyazaki are immortal figures, so I am still in a state of shock, and I don't feel like going to work today. Maybe it's just me, but in the last scene of the tale of Princess Kaguya, where the princess is taken away by the messenger, I cried and cried the first time I saw it. Do you think I was just carried away? What is the difference between Miyazaki and Takahata? The end. Well, it's hard for me to tell you why you started crying during this last scene. But Miyazaki's work is relatively easy to understand. It's easier to verbalize your emotions, so to speak. You might relate to the character, or you might be deeply moved by a certain line. That's Miyazaki. Whereas in Takahata's work, it's hard to describe why you were moved, so you force yourself to verbalize the feeling and say something like, I felt sorry for the character, and start replacing it with something else. I'll explain it later in the lecture. Now, say bye to him for now. And this is today's schedule. I divided the lecture into two parts. The first half focuses on the first 5 seconds, the biggest mystery. 2. Why did Takahata make such a traumatic film? 3. What is the meaning of its title? 4. Explore the main theme of this film. The second half, Takahata's dilemma and Miyazaki's jealousy. 6. Comments from Mamoru Oshii. He has a good point. 7. Death is beautiful, but life is ugly. 8. The 100 times scarier version than the first half. So, this is our plan. Okay, let's start talking about the mysterious first 5 seconds of the film. I'll start by explaining how people interpret this story in general. This is a brief summary of the film which I took from the official website of Nippon TV Network. The night of September 21st, 1945, Seita dies inside Sanomiya Station. The only thing he has is a candy tin. As the employee removes his body, bone fragments spill from the discarded tin, and out-of-season fireflies fill the air. 3 months later, on June 9th, Kobe City is struck by air raids. Seita lets his mom with a weak heart evacuate first, and then follows her later with his sister Setsuko, only to find his mother dead. Seita and Setsuko go to their aunt's house in Nishinomiya, but their aunt gradually becomes hostile to them. She doesn't even feed them properly. Finally, Seita decides to leave the house. He starts a new life with Setsuko in a cave beside the lake. That's the story. That's what it says. So, the story roughly goes like this. But there's more to it. As the air raids continue, people grow desperate. Seita can't feed Setsuko anymore. Setsuko grows weak and eventually dies of malnutrition. Seita cremates her by himself and dies at a station in Kobe. That's the whole story. About 50% of the viewers think that this is actually the story. After it was broadcast, I looked through all the tweets with Grave of the Fireflies hashtags, and I was surprised that so many people didn't remember the very last scene. The last scene is in Kobe. Take a look at this. Sorry, too close. There's Seita and Setsuko sitting on a bench. Setsuko is asleep and Seita is looking down at the buildings and the busy streets of Kobe. I think the scene is at the very core of this piece. But most people don't remember it. They don't seem to understand the meaning of it either. After Seita dies at the end, Setsuko comes to greet him. And before their souls depart completely, they stay for a while to look at us, the living. And that's how the other half of the viewers interpret it. So they all think that the two of them are looking out over Kobe City as ghosts. That's their interpretation. The others don't even go that far. Most of the people don't even remember this scene. That was my biggest surprise looking at all the tweets. So in that sense, it's kind of an occult film and it's a bit scary. I personally think that this ending is really the core of this film, but most of the people didn't even remember it. It was really surprising. But in this lecture, we'll go a lot deeper than this and go into the details. I'll explain the flow of the opening scene. So the first cut, I won't explain it all, but we'll take it in order. In total darkness, we see the ghost of Seita looking straight at the camera. I died on the night of September 21st, 1945. He says this line in his Kansai accent. Afterwards, the ghost Seita watches himself in real life. He looks like he's about to die, but still breathing. We can hear him panting. But he eventually collapses. Then the station employee arrives and confirms his death. He says, another death. And as he looks through his belongings, he finds a tin in his pocket. Not knowing what it is, he dumps it. Bone fragments spill out of it, and out of season fireflies emerge. Next. A young girl appears among the fireflies, the ghost of Setsuko. She stands there looking at her brother's dead body. As she tries to get closer, someone stops her from behind. She turns around and sees her dear brother still alive. They take each other's hands and walk from right to left and gradually disappear into the field of fireflies. And that's where the title appears. Are you crying already? Wow, most of you do cry. Well, this is largely how it ends. I want you to take a look at this. We went through in such a hurry, but if you look closely, we missed a spot. This place here. This scene where Seita is looking at his own dead body. There's a huge secret behind it. That is... if you break it down into pieces, it goes like this. After he says, I died on the night of September 21st, 1945, he looks at his lower right. Then a pole appears and there's something in front of it. Do you see it? Is this better? This is the pole, and there's something in front of it. But it disappears quickly, and Seita in real life, who is about to die, fades in. And then the scene continues. So, what is this thing? Actually, this is the extended version of the third frame, so that you can see it better. In front of this pole, before the real life Seita appears, this is shown on screen. This curve shape is obviously modern. It's an ashtray. You can tell by the design that it's a modern ashtray. As soon as I saw this, everything made sense. This ashtray is saying that Seita is still alive. He is in an afterworld of some sort. This film was made in 1988, so that means his spirit is still there at that very spot, even in 1988. It means that after all these years, he is still tied to that spot and being tortured by that memory. To look for proof that supports my theory, I saw the Blu-ray version. And there was a photo of location hunting in Kobe. And if you look at that photo, there's that exact same ashtray right next to the pole. This is a different pole, but they placed the ashtray next to this one. The shape of the pole is a bit different, and they included a modern ashtray in the scene. As you can see from the photo, they did the location hunting in 1987. So Grave of the Fireflies is not a story of the past, but rather starts in the present. Everybody thinks that they go back to the present at the end, but that's wrong. The story starts in the present. Seita's spirit still remains in this world, and he plays back the last 3 months of his life over and over again, billions of times, torturing himself. Now, why is he doing that? Some of you already said it, but it's kind of like the residual haunting phenomenon. These spirits remain at a certain location but travel on trains as well. So this film talks about why this spirit is still clinging on to this specific place, to this specific incident for 43 years. After 43 years, why does he still have to relive the most excruciating memory of his death? This film explains it all. As soon as you know this, the story turns into a totally different thing. This is not a sad story. It's more like a mystery story, trying to figure out why he was haunted by this painful memory over the past 43 years. So Takahata intentionally shows this ashtray at the very beginning. It's clear! Because it shows the present in the last scene, I immediately thought that the beginning would do the same. And then when I went back and checked, there it is, the ashtray. For Takahata, it's something obvious, but it's hard for most people to even notice it. As I looked through the tweets the other day, nobody mentioned this point, which is understandable. You have to be fully alert when you see this film, otherwise you'll miss out on so many things. Most people tend to predict this story before they see it. It's a sad story. He's not honest, she's mean. All these presumptions make them blind to all the important details. Here's an important scene. This is pretty near to the end. Setsuko is dying of malnutrition and Seita uses all of his savings to buy eggs and rice. And he cooks porridge with rice and eggs. But Setsuko dies while he's cooking. A very sad scene. This is the porridge. This one here. The porridge is in the clay pot and there's a rice bowl. There's chopsticks and he's using the cutting board as a tray. And this thing made out of a shell is used as a spoon. It looks handmade. Seita was also using this spoon at his aunt's house, so I guess he got it there. Eventually, Setsuko dies while Seita's cooking, and it's very sad. But the next day, after she dies... Sorry, let's turn off the fan. The next day, while Seita is cremating her body, while he cremates the body with the charcoal, the camera turns to the cave and captures the interior of the cave pretty clearly. This scene, here, this is where they slept, and you can see the light coming through the door. And in front of that, you can see the clay pot. I traced it so that you can see it more clearly. There's chopsticks and the spoon stuck inside. Seita ate it all by himself. So from time to time, Takahata drops hints that shows Seita's personality and his emotions. I think most people assume that he didn't eat it because it shows the porridge untouched before this scene. But you can see that Seita ate it before Setsuko's funeral. Now, why did Takahata go to the trouble of asking the animator to draw such a scene? A good example of his cruel side. And we can also see the watermelon Setsuko couldn't eat. She could only have a bite. This watermelon also appears while he's cremating, and it shows that he ate this as well. And then when I told this to someone, he said, no, the ants ate it, not him. So I did some research on it. After he cuts a small chunk of the watermelon and gives it to Setsuko, he cuts the rest in 2 halves and says, I'll leave it here. So the ants couldn't have left it looking like this. Seita is acting quite normal after Setsuko dies. He's really alert. He has an appetite, and Takahata shows that he's eating. But you can see a very subtle portrayal of humanity when you look closely. You can see that there's a piece untouched on the left-hand side. This is the piece Seita gave to Setsuko in the beginning. It's the sweetest bit on the very top. Setsuko barely manages to eat it and says, it tastes good. Seita couldn't possibly eat that, obviously. He already gave it to Setsuko. So Takahata shows both his kindness and his desire to live at the same time. That is Takahata's way of depicting reality. Most people miss out on these things. Can't bear it. Is it too much for you guys? Well, Seita seems strong on the surface, but he cries every time Setsuko shows some kind of bravery. For example, when she says, I heard from Auntie that my mom is already dead and sleeping in the grave, he starts crying like a baby. On the other hand, after Setsuko's death, after Setsuko dies, he doesn't cry at all. Even when he lies next to her body overnight, he remains expressionless. He lies next to her like this, and this scene is where he's cremating her body. Takahata intentionally drew his face with a blank expression. We can only see the red reflection of the fire in his eyes. He chose expressionlessness rather than sadness. And there's a good reason for this. So, even though the actors are expressionless, the audience sometimes sees sadness in them. This is called the Kuleshov Effect. This is an effect discovered by a filmmaker in Russia. No, maybe before the Soviet Union era. This is an example often used to explain the effect. If you show an expressionless man and a dead body of a child in turn, you'd think that this man is sad. Expressionless man and a hot soup makes you think that this man is hungry. Expressionless man and a flirtatious woman makes you think that the man is filled with lust. It is also called montage theory. Montage literally means editing films. So the Kuleshov effect is basically about creating psychological effects through editing. On the other hand, Miyazaki hates the Kuleshov effect. He hates it. He's against it. I'll tell you what Miyazaki likes. This is Dola from Laputa Castle in the Sky. Don't be such a pussy. You ought to do that on your own. And then she says to herself, might not be a bad idea. We can get that girl on our side. You see? She's explaining herself. He makes it really easy for the audience to understand the character. On the other hand, Takahata doesn't want to have the characters explaining themselves too much with extra lines, making them easy for the audience to understand. So he uses this Kuleshov effect and shows the expressionless Seita to express his devastation. What I'm trying to say is that the reason why we cry so much in this scene is because we automatically believe that Seita is suppressing his sadness. We imagine that he's suppressing his sadness and trying to look normal and brave. That's why we get so emotional. But it's more like he has lost his humanity. He has lost all his human emotions. That's why he gets hungry and eats whatever is left. He's relieved that he doesn't have to take care of her anymore. When the author Akiyuki Nozaka discussed this scene with Takahata before the film was made, he said, "I'm not a great person. Honestly, I was relieved when my sister died." He begged Takahata to include this in the film, and Takahata made a promise. So he's pretty calm when he goes to buy the charcoal to cremate Setsuko's body. Seita, who was furious when he heard that the combined fleet sunk, is now emotionless. He doesn't even react much when the charcoal seller tells him, "It'll burn well if you take off her clothes and cremate her with the beanskins." He becomes more and more dehumanized, less human. Whereas we, the audience, on the other hand, regain our humanity watching Seita lose his own humanity. And so we're moved and we cry. So the structure is acrobatic in a way. Takahata depicts the process of Seita losing his humanity in a very subtle way, by indicating that he actually ate the porridge and the watermelon. But he never shows Seita eating like a pig. So he's really elegant in a way. You must look very closely or else you'll miss out on these things. I'll now explain why Takahata doesn't stress this process too much, although he depicts it quite carefully. So part 1 was all about the first 5 seconds of the film. Part 2 is about why he made such a dramatic anime. Well, excuse me. Like I said, the reason why we cry is largely to do with this Kuleshov effect. It's the editing. We tend to think that the character is enduring great hardship, so it's natural that we feel sad. But Takahata never intended to make the audience cry, ever. There's an animation called In Search of Mother, and most Japanese people cried when they saw it. In his proposal for this project, Takahata stated clearly that he didn't intend to make people cry. Nonetheless, people who see this film mostly cry. I guess he doesn't understand the audience that well. But because he's so stubborn, he never admits that he made a mistake. Well, Takahata once wrote a book called The Ideal Manga Film. In this book, he says, Japanese animation now aims to make something exciting to capture people's hearts. Sure, it's easy to cry at these films, but that's not my style. I wanted the audience to see Grave of the Fireflies at a distance instead of immersing themselves in the story. And be critical of Seita. So, Takahata didn't want the audience to feel any kind of empathy towards Seita, nor did he want them to be emotional. On the contrary, he wanted the audience to have a bird's eye view. That's what he says in this book. And he also criticizes Miyazaki's recent works. He says that Miyazaki's earlier works captured things differently. And he recommended The Castle of Cagliostro. That's because there were so many ridiculous scenes. Like the scene where Chief Inspector Zenigata's face gets distorted as he looks into the water. People even laughed at Rupan's absurd jump scenes. That's because people are reminded that it's just an anime the moment they see them. Miyazaki back then knew how to separate his work from real life. And he goes on to say, but look at Spirited Away. Although it includes ridiculous scenes and the characters do all these weird moves, the audience don't laugh anymore. Miyazaki gets people excited and makes them subjective and immerse themselves in the story. But not me, Takahata says. And he goes on and on. You see? That's his wish, and he totally doesn't get it. He firmly believes that people won't cry in Search of Mother. Even if somebody tells him that they cried, he thinks that it's just a minority. In the proposal he writes, Marco is stubborn, lacks charm, and he never listens to adults. It's hard to sympathize with him. He doesn't seem to understand the power of drawing. These characters look too cute, but because he doesn't do the drawing himself, he doesn't see that. The drawing impacts people's feelings. He thinks that film direction is everything. So, when Seita loses his humanity and sleeps beside Setsuko's body expressionless and eats all the porridge and watermelon, he looks like he's grieving. Although Takahata intended to make him look perplexed by his sister's death. He tried to make him look like Seita regrets everything because he couldn't save her. But we, the audience, imagine that he's suppressing great sadness, that he's too sad to cry. He's expressionless because he cannot bear the pain. That's why we start to cry like babies. So everybody, I'm sorry to say this, but most of you are too busy crying to have a bird's eye view. So only psychopaths like me take notice of the empty pot and the remains of the watermelon. Why don't things work out the way he planned? After all, he's one of the greatest directors in the world. So why doesn't it work? Well, it's partially to do with the fact that this anime is based on literature. The producer, Toshio Suzuki, wrote a book called Job as Hobby, and he includes some episodes of Ghibli artists. On page 76, he says when he was making My Neighbor Totoro, Miyazaki, who heard about the Grave of the Fireflies, came to his house, knocked on the door and asked, "Is it based on literature?" Suzuki answers, "Yes, in a way." Miyazaki says, I want to do literature too. We don't need a cat bus. That's not literature at all. Miyazaki said that he wanted to get rid of the cat bus and even the spinning top scene. He said, I can't possibly go on doing that flying on the spinning top nonsense. Suzuki was at a loss and told Takahata about what Miyazaki said. Takahata said, oh, it would be such a pity to get rid of that cat bus. Suzuki thought pity was such a great word that he ran to Miyazaki's place and told him, Mr. Takahata is saying, it's such a pity. Miyazaki's mood suddenly changed and he said, really? Okay, then I will keep that cat bus. This is a true story. It's just like the Dola's episode. That Dola's scene. Do I still have it? Where's it gone? Ah, there. Dola says, you might not come back here anymore. And Pazu says that he understands. Dola says, I hope you know what you're signing up for, and tells him to get ready in 40 seconds. So you can see that she is a good person. This is not literature. The line explains that Dola is a good person. This is entertainment. In entertainment, communication is so important. The character's role is the key. But in literature, there is no such thing as a role. In literature, characters are often ambiguous. The readers themselves try to figure out who these characters are. That's literature. Takahata tried to make a literature animation where people can come up with their own answer. I always say that Takahata is relying too much on the audience. His posthumous work, The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, has an advertising slogan: the crime and punishment of the princess. I think a lot of people don't understand this. Originally, Takahata wanted to start the film on the surface of the moon. Kaguya's father, the king of the moon, says to Kaguya, you have committed a crime. As punishment, I will send you to Earth. Kaguya, so excited about going to Earth, is not listening at all. That was his original idea. Where is it? This is a sentence written on the back of the first flyer for the film. 50 years ago, Toei Animation was trying to make The Tale of Princess Kaguya after Horus, Prince of the Sun. And Toei asked the public for ideas for the story. And Takahata's idea was rejected. However, Takahata eventually got rid of this opening scene that I previously told you about, where the king says to Kaguya, you committed a crime so you'll be punished. Takahata said, since we had such great artists, I felt that the scene was redundant. No need to explain about the crime and punishment, he said. That's why this film is so confusing. So, he's doing the same thing again. He relies too much on the audience. Eventually, Suzuki came up with this idea. Suzuki knew that Takahata would never change his mind. Takahata insisted that the audience would understand. So Suzuki decided to include the theme in the advertising slogan, like some kind of riddle. He assumed that people would try to solve the riddle. He assumed that people would come to see the film to check if their answer was right, and think more deeply about the theme, and everything would turn out as Takahata intended. So it became kind of acrobatic in a way. However, as soon as it was released, everybody praised the drawing and the visuals, and nobody paid attention to the slogan. And therefore, they didn't quite understand the real theme. Most people interpret this story as an affirmation of life. Actually, there's a gruesome story behind this crime and punishment of the princess. It's as gruesome as Grave of the Fireflies, but I'll talk about it on some other occasion. Okay, now, it's already 45 minutes, but we'll keep going. I haven't even finished half of the free part. So, Takahata didn't intend to make a traumatic film, nor did he intend to make people cry. He wanted people to think. He wanted people to think deeply about the film. Why did Setsuko have to die? Why was their aunt so mean? Why did Seita die at the end? He wanted everyone to think about it every night for over a year. Instead of crying and not thinking and feeling sorry for the character, or instead of changing the channel, that's why he used so much energy to make animes. For Takahata, that's what literature means. So he's too reliant on the audience. He's a bit conceited to expect people to think about his film for years. He believes that his work is worth thinking about. But animators such as Mamoru Oshii and Hideaki Anno are 100 times better at doing this, although Takahata's work is 100 times deeper. The works of Oshii and Anno are more for middle school students to think about. Their works are not as honest and deep as Takahata's, but they are really good at making people think, why? Takahata lacks that kind of skill. Next, part 3, the meaning of Grave of the Fireflies. What does this title mean? One night, after the two siblings began living together in a cave, a plane flew above them. And they saw the plane's flickering light slightly in the distance. Seita says, "That's a kamikaze." He says that it is a plane for suicide missions. But then Setsuko says, "It looks like a firefly." In this piece, the firefly is represented as a creature that releases light right before their death. Seita goes and captures about 100 fireflies and releases them in the mosquito net, just to make her happy. After he releases the fireflies, there's this long shot, and it is so sly. So there they are in the cave, surrounded by fireflies, and this pole's beam is diagonal, that it looks like a photo of the deceased. Like the photo frame that we use in funerals. So they use this kind of effect that implies death in every scene where the light of the fireflies appears. In this scene, Seita recalls the fleet review his father attended. The fleet review where the Japanese Navy shows off their own fleets. He recalls that event. The combined fleet named Maya, which is covered by light in the film, had in fact already sunk a year before. Everything that shines in this film is dead. Kamikaze, fireflies, combined fleets, they are all destined to die. They are depicted as something beautiful that shines. And the scene continues till the next morning. Oh, it's upside down. Next morning, when Seita asks, "What are you doing?" Setsuko answers, "I'm making a grave. Mom is in the grave. Auntie told me that she's dead and she's in the grave." Seita starts to cry like a baby. Many people cry in this scene because it's so sad. But there's a reason for this. The reason why he shows the dead fireflies is because, from the fireflies' point of view, These two kids are also merciless and absurd. Of course, fireflies die within days after they start releasing light. Although, no one has the right to deprive them of their freedom and trap them inside a mosquito net. Setsuko never says, "Let's set them free." This scene where the fireflies fly inside the net is linked to the opening scene. In the opening scene, the ghosts of Seita and Setuko are watching the Great Tokyo Air Raid through a window. It's Kobe. Not Tokyo, the air raid in Kobe. Hotaru, which is firefly, is written down as fire is raining in Chinese characters. So, for them, fireflies are not something sad or painful, they are fire. It is life that is burning and it's beautiful. They catch them and bury them. So what they're doing is beautiful and yet cruel. Humans see the fire raining down in wars, whereas the fireflies see the human as an absurd being that mistreats them. They are both cruel and yet beautiful. Takahata kept on saying that this is not an anti-war film. He had been saying that all along. So what is the theme? What is the theme? Part 4 is the last part of the free part, so bear with me. Takahata says that he doesn't want to make people cry. Nor does he want to make an anti-war film. He even says this in his lecture at the Peace Convention. Some people say, "I saw Grave of the Fireflies, I'm against war." But that's not what he intended. It is wrong to conclude that war is wrong just because you saw something painful and you want to avoid it. He says he knows all too well about the Japanese. Japanese, as well as other races, insist that we need armed forces just because we want to avoid pain. They say, "Let's be normal just like the others in the face of threat." That's us. He says that clearly a number of times. So officially, Takahata says that he didn't try to show the brave and wonderful young children who endured hardship, but the kindness of the young people who didn't have any choice but to die in the midst of war. In this modern world, people are now able to confine themselves to their own safe world. I think people now are able to relate to Seita even more. The young people who feel reluctant to connect with society parallel Seita, who is trying to form a small family with his sister. But they couldn't possibly survive through severing ties with society. That's the tragedy. That's what Takahata says. Let me explain by looking back at the opening. The scene where Seita dies. Someone even leaves a rice ball in front of the dying Seita. When you see this film from Seita's point of view, you feel that everybody around him is so evil and not willing to help. But Takahata shows this good person who leaves a rice ball without seeking any return. And he shows it in the very first scene. He says right from the beginning, you can't blame the war for this. He states it clearly in the beginning so that no one can make any excuse later on. It's not the war or the poverty that kills people's minds. I personally wonder why the spirit of the mother never appears. Because Setsuko always wanted to see her mother. It would be natural for the mother to appear at the end with Seita. And because Seita was desperate to meet his father, the father could have appeared as well, so that they can be together again. There's even a scene where the four take a photo under the cherry blossom. It would be reasonable to have their father and mother join in at the end, if it's about them having no choice but to die. So why just the two of them? I think the answer to this is related to the core theme of this film. We're running out of time, but let's see your answers. They're still alive? I don't think so. Their parents are still alive? Nope. Why didn't I think of that? Yes, a lot of people think it's a story about Setsuko and Seita. The souls of the parents have already departed. Redemption of Seita, people die alone. It's about confession. The parents were also hikikomori. Because Seita tied Setsuko down? Good point. Well then, it's just my imagination, but here's my own answer to this question. They couldn't go to heaven where their mother was. They couldn't go to hell either. In Dante's Divine Comedy, it's called purgatory. Purgatory means a prison where people are detained. People who can't go either to heaven or to hell end up in purgatory. They are allowed to go to heaven after purifying themselves from their sins through torments. That's how it is defined in Catholicism. People have different views on this. Because Seita is trapped in purgatory, he must face his sister's death even in 1988 when the film was released. Takahata understands his eternal suffering. He understands it, but states that even so, he has to relive it over and over again. It sounds a bit brutal, but he says Seita has no choice. Seita has been facing that pain for such a long time, and he knows that it's painful, but there's no other choice. He depicts Seita as a boy trapped in purgatory right from the beginning. That's why the story starts from the Sanomiya station. There are two scenes where Seita looks straight at the camera, and the first one is at the very beginning. He looks straight at the camera when he says, "I died on the night of September 21st, 1945. Another scene is at the very end, when Seita says, "It's late, go to sleep." And Setsuko sleeps on his lap. They're both ghosts already. When Setsuko sleeps, Seita looks straight at the audience and then looks away at the streets of Kobe. What is he trying to say? Why doesn't he look at us when Setsuko wakes up? That's because he can't when Setsuko is awake. I'll talk about this mystery in the second half. I think this is the scariest part of the story. We'll also talk about who killed Seita and Setsuko. You can't blame so many things such as the selfishness of Seita, their aunt, and so forth. The reason why Seita had to die is the scariest part of this story. I'll talk about it in the second half. Okay, let me see the result. I talked for an hour. The more you know about Takahata, the more interesting it gets. Miyazaki is a genius, but Takahata is a monster. In the documentary film called Ghibli Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, Takahata rarely appears. Miyazaki has a short temper and often yells, "Don't take a photo!" or "That's the stupidest thing I've ever seen." But a few days later, he comes back and asks you for your opinion. Whereas when Takahata says no, it's a clear no. When someone says to him, "Please understand, everyone is in trouble because of you," he suddenly gets angry and says, "I'm not causing anyone any trouble. I'm the one who is in trouble." He is such a handful. Okay, let's see the result. Wow! Thank you very much. The second half will be really scary, so beware. See you then. So, the next Saturday, we will have a gathering. So, those of you who live in Tokyo, do come along. Next week, we will finally dig deep into Sapiens. Okay, the latter half now begins. Let's switch.
Thank you for watching until the end. I am the most famous Otaku King in Japan, Otaking Toshio Okada. I started planning to talk overseas about animations and movies popular in Japan in English. Before long, I'm planning to add English subtitles to movie talking in Japanese, so please look forward to it. If you ask a question in this comment field of this video, maybe I will talk about comments as a theme. We welcome the people who are interested in the forefront of Japanese otaku culture, and those who want to hear stories of interesting animations and movies. So please subscribe our channel. If there is good relation, I will get better and I will do my best. Thanks.